Okay, since it's 10 minutes till our break, I'd like to open it up now to a general panel discussion with our four speakers today, just to summarize what we've seen in the first block of talks. We had a couple questions submitted from people who'd signed up for the meeting, maybe to share, maybe you guys could take turns answering some of these and sharing your thoughts on them. One question to start things off, just very broad. What are some things that have surprised or disappointed you about the promise of computational ethology, specifically for understanding the brain? It's a pretty open one, if anyone has any comments.
I mean, I think it's harder than I, as a computer scientist going into this, I was like, okay, tracking, that's going to be the hard part. And once we're done with tracking, you know, that'll be great. Or once we've got behavior classification working, that'll be great. But the hard part is, yeah, putting all this data together into something really useful. I mean, I think there's just a lot of work to do there. We need to be working really closely with the domain experts on these topics, because you have to understand the neuroscience questions as well as the quantitative methods. That was, maybe naive of me to think that the computer vision problems would be the hard part, but the hard part is the biology is very hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that a little bit too. So coming in, I think that there is a real paucity of, but at least what I called my talk, the theoretical infrastructure of how do you go from the stuff that we're able to track and to actually really make predictions. Like, and this is something I think a few of us were talking about before, like a lot of us were mentioning, like unsupervised learning for describing behavioral patterns and structure. At the end of the day, any method for doing anything is only going to be as good into biology as the things that can actually predict. Like, can we predict stuff about either the future behaviors that animal does? And Kristen seems like she's doing some really cool stuff on this. And can we predict stuff about how the neural activity is changing, and really drawing sort of connections between the raw numbers we're pulling out of these data sets and the raw numbers, other data sets that we have, and sort of being able to pull those two things together really is sort of we're spending a lot of our time thinking about, because I don't think anybody has great answers yet. And it's fun, but it's been a huge challenge.
Okay.
I think like maybe as a kind of more of an end user rather than a developer, I can sort of speak to this. One of them is that trying to reconcile high throughput experiments with large numbers of individuals with the sufficient granularity to extract pose data from those individuals. I think what Kristen was presenting us was really kind of exciting, and I think that's one. It would be great if you could do like a multi-well experiment like the ones we do, and you wouldn't have to do some subsequent kind of more detailed pose studies independently to just do a kind of one-shot experiment that could provide you all of the information you need. And I don't think the software is ready to do that yet, but maybe you guys disagree.
Yeah, so what, I'll just, a related question, I guess, building on that, is what you see as the barriers to progress in this research right now. Is it getting the data sets there, the software there, getting metrics? And then what would a success look like to you?
I mean, to me, as a sort of training as a theorist, the success always looks like a successful prediction, right? It always looks like I'm able to, like, people always like, this is always a discussion that I have with my students, postdocs, whatever, whenever we're working on a project. At what point do we stop trying to optimize everything, and when do we start writing it up and actually say something? And usually it's when we have something to say. And so for me, any success just looks like being able to say something which looks like insight into the biological system that then can then be the basis of future studies where other people can make other predictions. So maybe it's a little bit simplistic, but for me, that's always what we're going for.
I think one thing, if I may say something, is that behavior is difficult, and I really like what Kristen said about this. Is that she thought the tracking would be difficult, and then the behavior would be more easy. And it's remarkable how even in model systems like Drosophila, how difficult it is to make great progress. And so that's why I really liked about Joe's talk, is that then if you take that to non-model organisms, because if we just focus, it's wonderful. I think the work in Drosophila is amazing, but if we just focus on flies and on mice and so on, we're going to get such a limited perspective on what behavior really is. And so I think that there's very few people that adopt these technologies as Joe does, to actually look at non-model systems. And I think I would love to see more of that. I think we're going to learn a lot from that approach as we go forward.
Yeah, I'd second that, and especially also kind of looking at behavior in more ecologically relevant conditions. And then in terms of what I would love to achieve as success, I would love to have these kind of unsupervised machine learning methods, be able to tell me something that I really couldn't have seen without kind of scrutinizing the data. And, I think, working with biologists, they're really great at their pattern recognition. They find things that, I can't see when I look at the data. But I would, that I think is what I would love to get machine learning to do, is to kind of extract new principles from this kind of data that, we admit to ourselves we couldn't have found otherwise.
Yeah, that's a great point. That actually leads on nicely to a question that we got from YouTube, which is, we had a question about types of modeling techniques or theoretical techniques that you think are underexplored or understudied in this area. So what do you think needs more attention?
I think that, so one thing that I've tended to notice is there's most of the outside, so collective behavior has sort of been really special in my mind, and that there's been a really great history of people building dynamical models where time is an important component to it. But if you look to see how most behavior is modeled through things that derive more from the statistics community, looking for things like sort of Markovian, hidden Markovian, things like that. And I think that one of the aspects, and this is also coming up in neuroscience as well, when people talk about like looking at latent dynamic variables in neural systems, really trying to make inferences about dynamical systems and behavior, and really trying to understand what's happening over these really long times. And to me, that's something where we just need to keep on building up our modeling. And we're trying to do our best in our group, but I think there's a lot of different stuff that really needs to be built on, and I think it's been understudied.
I have I realize we're running short on time, but I have a question. So if we could, riffing on the moving beyond model organisms and the unsupervised discovery that Kristen mentioned, if we could just set up an environment where we could just track lots of things without a super specific purpose, for example, an ant colony, or just what would that look like? Like, if we could develop the computer vision algorithms and the unsupervised learning algorithms, what would that look like to you? Like, is that like 10 mice in a room doing something with different food sources, just track them for 10 hours and then extract something? Like, would be I think a scope that you think could be possible 5 years from now?
I'd be interested to know what people think about that, because that basically summarized my PhD. I thought, in the late 90s, I thought if I apply computer vision technology and I can track all ants in a colony, then somehow I can miraculously find something no one else found. And that's not really the scientific method. And certainly I failed, and my colleagues that employed this similar sort of theoretically driven, vague approach, just using tracking. I don't know. I'd be really interested to know whether people think that things have fundamentally changed now. and that you can then extract, because I'm all about exploratory science. It's not like everything has to be hypothesis driven, but we certainly, just looking at a system without actually doing manipulations and without asking questions, I think is a relatively weak way of conducting science, at least in my experience. But I'd love to know what other people think.
Yeah, I agree again with that. I feel like I've also tried that. I was like, okay, I'll just collect all the tracking data and stuff will come out. But I think there's like a happy medium between hypothesis driven and some amount of exploration. You kind of, you want to be in that right space of setting up the experiment so that there are, maybe 5 or 10 different things you're looking at rather than just not knowing what you're going into potentially. One of the things though that we're, so we work on the tool side of things a lot more in our lab, and we are interested in kind of things that probably Ian already has working in his group of having many cameras allowing us to do kind of 3D tracking of limbs of interacting animals, that kind of thing, but with a particular experiment in mind. So we're collaborating with biologists and theorists here to come up with the right design of those experiments.
Okay, we are at our break time before the afternoon session. So the way this will work is if you are attending CVPR or if you signed up for the YouTube stream, we have a Gatherly room lounge where you can go and discuss where this, the organizers will at least be there. Hopefully some of the speakers, you guys are welcome to join us if you don't need a lunch break. We'll be hanging out there and having just an informal discussion for the next hour. And then we'll reconvene at 2 p.m. Eastern for the second block of talks, which Jen is going to lead. These are applications of multi-agent behavior analysis in human data sets, as well as talks by the winners of our competition.